Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. Now, one of the things I've been researching and practically exploring with clients recently is the question of what constitutes ethical behaviour in the current climate. Decisions that might previously have not had a major ethical component suddenly do. Like, for example, which staff to ask to work on site and which to ask to work from home, or how to respond to the situation that customers are finding themselves in. This impacts how we perceive companies, either as people we spend our money with or who employ us. And I've been reflecting a lot about the idea that we're judging companies by the way in which they respond to the situation somewhat differently to the way we might normally do. Unlike previous crises, our collective awareness of good and bad behaviour is far more immediate thanks to the proliferation of social media. Historically, we've often forgotten when companies have done bad things in the past, and we've continued to use their services. But now I think our collective memory of the coronavirus and how people responded is going to be somewhat longer lasting. Partly because we're hearing about it as it happens, or as it doesn't. The feedback loop from consumer to company is much faster and more public than ever before. And with that in mind, I recently came across a website called didtheyhelp.com, which allows individuals to register companies and celebrities that have done either good or bad things during the crisis. The website was set up by Pooj Morjaria, and I got in touch with him to ask if he'd be willing to come onto the podcast to talk about it. Pooj said yes, and so in this episode I'm speaking to him about the idea behind the site, the challenges of recording good and bad behaviour, and his hopes for the future. We also cover the ethics of running a site that records other people's ethical behaviour. And he reveals some of the responses he's had from individuals trying to use the site for surprising ends, and companies who've got in touch with him about the fact they're on the site or not on the site. In talking about didtheyhelp.com, I think there are some valuable lessons for all of us about how we think about ethics. So Pooj, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now, look, I guess the first question is, can you just tell my listeners a little bit about didtheyhelp.com? What's the idea behind it and how did you come up with it?
Sure. So the idea behind didtheyhelp.com is essentially, as the name says, it's pretty, the URL is quite unique, as in, did they help? Did a corporation or a public figure help? Now, it's quite broad, and obviously I created it during the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, which we're currently living in now. And so it was basically to answer that question: did these corporations or public figures help? And it was born from the idea about a month ago, or just over a month ago. I was surfing Twitter, and one of the things that I've noticed in the weeks leading up to that was that a lot of people were keeping lists of corporations that had done good and bad. And the way that they were keeping note of this was on paper. So that one person who had become quite popular at the time, who was getting many retweets and upvotes, had been taking, I think, A2 pieces of paper and just splitting it down the middle with a pen and saying good and bad, and then just had like names on either side, whether it was a corporation or a public figure. And it got to the point when I first saw it that they had about 4 or 5 sheets of these papers, because everyone kept saying, who's keeping note? And obviously they meant it in a jokey way, or I don't think anyone was really serious. And that just really hit home for me, because over the last, ever since I've been aware of the news, let's say over the last couple of decades, I've always noticed, companies always do bad. We always grill them for it in the moment. We get angry. I like to think it lasts. Well, I like to think it lasts about 24 hours, 48 hours. We're angry, and then it just kind of just disappears basically. And then a week later, we're buying their goods, we're investing in them. They get bailed out by the government. Just take an example, not to pinpoint Richard Branson directly, but he's been in the news this week because he wanted a £500 million bailout from the UK government, and yet he hasn't been a resident of the UK for tax purposes for the last 14 years. And, he hasn't paid any tax to us. He wants to bail out from us, and his personal wealth is in the billions. He's one of the people on our site and one of the public figures and one of the companies that we track. So in my opinion, when I saw that, I just thought, why do we keep doing this? Why do we why do we get outraged at companies and public figures for all of 1 or 2 days? And then as soon as we want to book our next holiday, we're back on booking with Virgin Atlantic and saying, yep, take us to wherever. I'm happy to invest with you guys. And all I ever hear then a week or two later would be, oh, Richard Branson's a national treasure. He's a billionaire, self-made. Isn't he great? And I just think, does anybody remember that he furloughed all of his staff or told them to take sick leave to pay themselves during this period because he didn't want to pay them or dip into his own personal wealth? Does anyone remember that he asked for a £500 million bailout from the UK government, taking taxpayer money, which is meant for, I'd say, small to medium-sized companies who genuinely cannot keep afloat in this period and need help from the government to pay their staff so that when this all, when the lockdown's over and they can all come back to work, that they were at least paid and looked after. Yet we've got billionaires asking for handouts, which they could easily do themselves because they haven't paid tax, essentially. So based on that idea, I just thought, I've got to start documenting this and I've got to let people start using this tool because maybe, just maybe, and I'm not convinced that this site will be used or remembered after this period is over. I would like to think it would be, but I just thought if I made something where we were tracking all the news articles of all the things that corporations and public figures were doing, then maybe people will use it when this is all over and remember and then make an informed decision about who to invest in.
And that's fascinating because as you were talking, I was thinking, well, this is a relatively simple thing, right? Which is it's the Santa Claus piece. Let's have a list of who was naughty and who was nice and kind of track that. And so as children grow up, there is this idea of the reckoning and sort of you will be held to account for all the things that you did, whether it's over the year or whether it's over your lifetime. These things sit fundamentally in kind of context of religion and other moral and ethical structures. And what you're basically doing here is saying, let's create a collective memory that notes this stuff down so that we don't forget.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of imposing that structure that most of us will have grown up with as a child, which is the idea that you should behave because someone's watching you and someone will remember what you've done. And so I think it's a really interesting, simple piece that you've just taken and deployed in a situation when it's very visible to us at the point in time what people are up to.
Precisely. That's exactly why I did it, because when I saw people keeping lists, I thought, well, firstly, your list isn't accessible by everybody else on the planet. Secondly, I may not be able to read that and I may want access to it and I don't know where I'm going to go. Like, I could bookmark this, but then you could have, in the coming days, done another tweet and another tweet and another tweet with new pictures. How am I going to keep up to date with your list of stuff? And also, the list was quite simplistic. So it was just names on the good and the bad side. But I didn't know why they were on the good side or the bad side. It didn't make sense to me. So when I saw that, I thought, fine, I'll go buy a domain, didtheyhelp.com, which surprisingly was available. It seems like one of those domains which wouldn't be available, didtheyhelp.com. But funnily enough, it was. So I bought it. I've got a background in web development and digital and software. So with the help of my best friend, Jack Ratcliffe, who I'll mention him here. Basically, he was in Japan at the time because he's doing a PhD and he was there touring and everything was in lockdown. So he couldn't do much because we were at the start of the pandemic where everything was starting to shut down and I was working from home and he didn't know what was happening with him. So he had a bit of spare time on his hand, even though he was touring in Japan. And I said to him, look, I'm going to go to bed, but could you just build me a quick search functionality in WordPress? Because then I can start populating the database once I wake up. And, if it becomes anything great, if it doesn't, it's a personal project. It's a hobby I do on the side and maybe some people will use it. And, by the time I woke up, he'd already set up the basic functionality and what you see today is essentially what he set up for me, a nice little search bar. And then we added elements down the bottom, which we can discuss later. But essentially the core aspect was I can create a profile for Amazon or Richard Branson or whoever. And I could just literally list by bullet points. If they did something bad, it goes on the list. If they did something good, it goes on the list. And basically then if you typed in Amazon, you could just see what they did. And then there'd be a link to the news source, which said, yeah, they did this and you can read more about it. And I thought, I want to provide that to people because then maybe they'll use it in the future. I don't think everyone will use it. I think that the popularity that we see right now will dwindle to an extent because this idea is of the time. It's very relevant. So therefore it's quite popular at the moment. But I do believe that a fraction of people in the world do care enough to then use it after that. And if it changes people's mind to go forward and use that, then great, I'm all for that.
And just talk us through how this works. So you basically take submissions from anyone and then they're assessed and validated, and then you give people points. How does all of that work?
Sure. Okay, so that's two questions really. So I'll start on the points. So the points, I wanted to keep it incredibly simple, and there are pros and cons to using that system that I've implemented on the site. Now, essentially how it works is, firstly, we don't shame people for doing nothing. We're not there to, list every company on the entire planet or every public figure on the entire planet, because then, you and I and everyone else would be on it. What we're doing is we're just keeping a public record of whether you actually did something good, then great. We want to promote that because we want people to know you're a good company or a good person who actively used your millions or your billions to actually help the people that work for you. And if you actually went out of your way to do bad profit or, price gouging or anything like that, then we want people to be aware that if they're buying from, let's say Tesco's, they never did this. Tesco's actually have a very good reputation on the website. But if they were price gouging, or like Walmart in America is price gouging, or were told to keep on top of their suppliers from price gouging, then we want people to know, by the way, you're buying from a company who during the pandemic knew that essential items were, essential. And so they raised the price by 2 or 3 times what they were normally worth and profited from the people during a time when the world was burning. So you might want to not invest in them going forward. So that's one. So basically what we do with that information is we list it, and everyone starts on 0. And if they've done something bad, then they get a -1. And if they do something good, they get a +1. And it just goes up and down in that way. So it's that simple. And we don't measure good deeds versus good deeds or bad deeds versus bad deeds. So if Richard Branson was to, donate $1 million and then Bill Gates donated $10 million, they'd both get 1 point each. We keep it that simple. And there is a case to be made that maybe we should be weighing them up against each other, and one should be worth more than the other. Surely one should be worth 10 times more than the other. But on the other side of it is that there was a fear of the process becoming too complicated and therefore the whole project falling in on itself. What I didn't want to do was get really hooked up in the whole, making overly complex, having a whole system of, if this happens and that happens and that happens and that happens. And therefore, by the time we got something out, then, we'd spend an hour on one profile and we'd only put 1 point in because we were weighing it up against, just a massive list of different criteria that it had to meet to get certain points. Because I saw that as stopping the project from going forward. So what I did was just say, nope, everything's worth a point or a -point. It's as simple as that. You're going to make it on the list. If you do multiple good things, great, multiple points. If you do multiple bad things, multiple bad points. And that's how simple the rating system is. And yeah, a lot of people have complained, something Trump has done compared to something a small business may have done, don't compare, because Trump's is on a national scale, whereas this is just in a local scale for a smaller business. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. I totally agree with that. But if I was to then do a case-by-case analysis, or the volunteers who help out with the website were to do a case-by-case analysis for everything, then we wouldn't have as comprehensive a site as we do. And ultimately, you don't have to buy into the rating system if you don't want to. You could just use the profiles as a way to view what everyone did or did not do, and whether they did something good or bad. So you could just ignore the rating system altogether. That's just so we could have a bit of fun with it and just see where the rankings are, because I did want to promote the really, really good people, but I also wanted to let people know, these companies are really, really bad. And some of these people have got -5, -6. So they must have done multiple bad things to get onto that leaderboard. And so it's really just for them. The in-between of the people who may have a -1 or a +1, the rating system doesn't really matter. All I want you to know is that they did something good or bad, and you can read about it. But forget the rating system if it's too simplistic for you. As for the process that we employ, we do take submissions from people on the website, so you can come into it. We started off when we first started off, I was doing it alone. So I put in 300 profiles all by myself researching, and I targeted the major companies first off: Microsoft, Amazon, Google, whoever, all the major public figures, Bill Gates, Richard Branson. And so I did the first 300 myself before launching it, because I wanted to get to a certain amount of entries, and I wanted the site to actually feel usable, not just have 10 and then go, cool, this is great, but there's hardly anything on it. I spent all of 10 seconds going through those profiles. So in the first week that it was created, I spent my time doing that. And then my best friend Jack Ratcliffe, who developed the site, he said, you should start taking submissions from people, because this will help you. It'll take time away from you actually researching this yourself. So the information is coming directly to you in the system. And then you review everything before it goes onto the site. So if they say, well, this company did that and they back it up with a news source, then you can actually go and have a look at that. And if it makes sense, then great. They've done the hard work for you and you can just put that on the site straight away. And so that's what we do at the moment, where we take submissions, and our backlog is currently over 1,000 and that's on the basis that we're actually putting live, I'd say on average, anywhere between 15 to 50 new profiles a day. So the website is continually being improved every day. And even at that rate, we're still behind 1,000. We can't seem to break that because we take so many submissions in every day. I think we probably get about 25 to 50 a day submissions that we get into the site. So the backlog's always around 1,000 or more. And so we have a review process where the volunteers see these submissions come in and they then clean it up. So, it may be bad English, or it may just be an opinion. So they have to go read the article. They have to, basically justify that this is correct and that the article is going to back that up. They'll write out nicely. It'll go into a review pipeline. The review pipeline will be reviewed by another volunteer. So it's basically you do half and half. So someone else will review that for them. Then they'll go into a publish pipeline where I'll publish it. So nothing on the website goes live unless I've reviewed it, because ultimately I'm taking responsibility for anything that is on the website, so that they've just gone through various little criteria to get it there. But then I'll review their work and go, yep, they've done this correctly. This makes sense. I'll publish it to the site now. So I do that all myself personally. And so that's kind of the process that we go through.
And so you're filtering out unverifiable opinions. Yes. You're filtering out stuff that is sort of not relevant, just with a view to saying, look, what we're trying to capture here is verifiable actions rather than suspicions, presumptions, or I guess sort of flipping it the other way is sort of attempts to game it in terms of companies trying to look better than they might be in reality.
Yeah, precisely. So a lot of the recommendations we get do have a source. So that's really good, because if it doesn't have a source, it doesn't go on the website. That's one of the first things that I decided was going to be part of the website. So every point that we make about a company, good or bad, has a news source that you can click through and read more about. We're trying to be as neutral as we can. So we're not there to give our opinion. We're not there to slander someone. Everything we say about a company has already been said about them by a reputable news source, whether it's, CNN or a news source, or whether it's the official Twitter account of the company or someone verified. So we're not there to say, well, they did this. And so we back up everything we can. We try to keep it as neutral as we can. And we have been accused by certain people of being, political. We try to keep it apolitical. So we don't try, for instance, I may not care for Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean that I want him to have a worse profile than anybody else on the website. Ultimately, the facts have to speak for themselves. So we try and keep the site as neutral as possible. And sometimes some people, it can seem like we haven't kept it neutral. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. And we try and rectify that where we can. And in some instances, we do get insider information. In fact, I say in some cases, if we say it's a fraction of the 1,000 that we get in, then it's actually quite a lot. And so we can't actually put those onto the site. So like a lot of people in America will come to us and say, well, this large company is not actually doing what they said, or this large company is doing this. And we don't put that on the website. We put it away in another pipeline. We don't actually do anything with it at the moment because we haven't got time to. The hope is in the future that we can start funneling this through to journalists who can then go and research this themselves and make a story out of it if there is any factual element to it and it's actually true. But we ourselves don't have time to go and look into that, and we're not a news site. So we're not going to be writing about Walmart or about Amazon and the practices that are happening there that we can't verify ourselves just because someone's told us that they've done that. That's a journalist's job. So we're trying to keep that out of the way, but we do hope to do something with it, because ultimately, those are stories that need to be told, but which aren't being told currently, maybe because the news sites or the journalists don't have time to, track those down. But in the future, there will be a reckoning for that information as well. So we hope to be able to help, news companies and journalists with that.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, because I was going to ask you, what do you think the motivation is for people sending stuff to you? And what you've just outlined there is effectively whistleblowing, which is an interesting angle I hadn't really thought of. And I'm guessing the majority of what you have is people who just spot things, who want an outlet for their frustration, anger, irritation, or pleasure, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. What I've realized is that the popularity of the site is because people are upset. In the first month that we've launched, we've had over 300,000 visits to the site. We've had, over 3 million page views. It's been unbelievably popular. I've had to upgrade the hosting environment for the company, for the website, to a new environment just to keep up with the speed of it, because at one point it was going too slow because we had we'd have 2,500, 3,000 people on the website. So what I've realized that popularity stems from people being angry with corporations and with the way they're being treated. I mean, these people are at home because they're quarantined, they've either lost their job or they've been furloughed or something has happened to them. And they want that to be known that this company did this to me and it's not fair that they did this to me. They're a multi-million-dollar or multi-billion-dollar company. And they've just, chucked me out like I'm nothing. And I've given them, so many years of my life to work for them and given them everything I can. And when the push came to shove, they just pushed me aside. So whistleblowing is one of the biggest things that we get on the website, and people coming onto it and saying, well, look, here's a news article. You need to, put this on the site and do this. Or people coming in saying, well, my partner just got fired from this company, and, they'll be in some kind of supermarket company in America and they'll say, my partner is actually a foreigner. They've come as an immigrant and they're actually being mistreated because they know that they can't get work anywhere else. You need to know about this. And my heart goes out to them. It's really sad to hear that, but I can't put that on the website against the company because I can't personally verify that happening in America. So if someone could verify that for me, then fantastic. I'd love to put that out there and shame that company for abusing immigrants and the fear they have of being fired. But until that happens, it just can't go on because we're not there to slander any company without any proof.
And it's really interesting as an outlet for people because, I was talking to Alison Taylor, who's an ethics specialist at NYU, and she was saying, look, in this current age, we can't go out and protest. And so there's been this big thing around recently, and if you look at things like Brexit, there's a big sense of sort of protest votes and going on marches and kind of citizens standing up for things. And obviously, if you're stuck at home, and clearly there are some people that decide that they don't want to be stuck at home and think it's appropriate to do other things, but the majority of us are going to say, you have no outlet for this stuff. And at a time when it's particularly emotive and we're all thinking about what matters to us, all of these things bubble up. And I think what's interesting about what you've done is it's created an outlet for something that's naturally there. And so you can see to a certain extent people doing this on social media. And I think you're adding a very interesting pillar to that, which is sort of add it to the collective memory. Add it to this piece here rather than just putting it out through your own channel.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was surprised that there wasn't an outlet like this, to be honest. I mean, I know there's a website called the Good Shopping Guide or similar, which I've heard of, which I've never personally used myself. And as far as I could tell, they were our nearest direct competitor. And I don't like to use the word competitor because I think everyone should be doing this. There have been multiple sites since I've sprung up that have tried to do the same thing I can. And all I can say is keep going, keep trying. I'm not the only website that should be doing this. I think that people should be doing this because there is no competition in something like this. We're doing it so that it's at the forefront of the public mind so that they remember that companies acted this way or that way. But the company, the Good Shopping Guide, what I found was that they kept secret how they were judging companies. They would just say, well, they've got this ranking for this ranking for that. And what I found out is that, which I'm surprised by, is that I'm filling a gap in society where we're actually tracking news articles of things people have done. So we're not saying we've got our own criteria, and therefore, if you don't meet our criteria, you're either good or bad. We're saying, well, news articles in their very nature are good or bad. And so if a news title says, something like, Jeff Bezos won't pay, $5 million to keep his staff working for the next 2 weeks, but has a personal wealth of over $100 billion, then, that's inherently negative against him, obviously. So we're not saying, well, that meets our criteria of negative. That is negative. And so we're just listing it. We're like a library for these companies, and we're just trying to list them and try and make sure that you can go and look at their profile. And I'm surprised that nobody else has done that till now, but I'm glad to be filling that. And if anybody else was to do it, I'd be like, yes, do it, because you probably get stuff that we've missed. We can't get everything. Even the fact that our database is nearly 1,000 strong of companies and public figures doesn't mean that we're even scratching the surface of how many companies and public figures there are out there. We can't do it all by ourselves. And whilst we're grateful for the volunteers on the website who are helping on a day-by-day basis or a week-by-week basis, or the people that are submitting in, making sure that we've always got enough information to keep updating the website and keep it going, other websites and other people, if they want to do something similar but feel like I beat them to it, go ahead and do it. I'm sure that, you could have 1,000 of these websites like I'm doing, and we still would probably not scratch the surface. There's loads of information out there, and to catalog it is near impossible.
As you were saying, you're verifying everything back because you don't have the resources to go do the detective work to check whether this stuff is true or not. So you're dependent on news sources and, as you say, the companies, or in the case of celebrities, the individuals themselves. Have you sort of come across interesting, and I hesitate to use this word, but nothing else occurs to me, sort of fake news things whereby, there are news outlets that are less respectable than others, should we say? And how do you think about the sort of quality of the sources?
Yeah, that's a good point, because that is a difficult one, because we don't know every news source out there. Obviously, I've got my own preconceptions of certain news sources, which I wouldn't personally trust. And my partner, who helps on this when she can, although she works full time, so it's very hard for her to. She's done a bit of vetting for me of these submissions and some of the news sources that we get in. I'm not going to name some of them because, like I said, I may have my own biases against certain news outlets, but then that's me saying they're less reputable to me. And I feel like reputation is a very subjective point. I mean, yes, there are fake news sites out there. The main one, which I don't mind saying, would be Breitbart for me. Everyone knows that to an extent they have their own agenda, and it could be fake news to a point. I won't name some of the bigger companies who I think are fake news, because that's going to be different person to person. But that is a tricky one, because ultimately, I didn't want the website to be political. I didn't want the website to be biased. I didn't want the website to be full of all the companies who I think are good to be shown as good. There are companies on there who I thought were good, who I've always supported, and then to find out how they've treated their staff or how they've profited from this by raising their prices, I've been shocked. And if anything, I've been glad to put that on the website, because I've had my opinion changed of them. And so some of the news sources that we get in, we've had discussions internally with the volunteers, and we've gone, well, what do we think? Should we, use this as to back up this article or this point that we're making about a company? And ultimately it comes to, yes, we have to, because we're trying to change everyone's mind in the world, to try and get everyone in the world to band together, to come together and say, no, we're not taking this from these multi-billion-dollar companies or these multi-billion-dollar public figures anymore, is going to take a unifying act. There's not going to be any space for politics. There's not going to be any space for, being, subjective. It's got to be something that's neutral that everyone can use. So I want someone from every end of the political spectrum to come to the site and find a news source that they trust on there to change their opinion on something. Because if we can only change a few people, well, okay, that would be great, surely, okay. But I want to change everyone's mind, because the one thing that unifies us is the fact that we all in the public are investing in the same companies together, regardless of what our political beliefs are, regardless of what our religious beliefs are. That all is moot, because ultimately, if Apple is done bad, then every political party member is going to be investing in Apple or Microsoft or whoever else, Samsung. And so I need the site to work for everyone, not just a small section of the public.
And how do you decide what's relevant? Because the sort of if you look at the URL, it's sort of on the one hand, it's very broad, right? Did they help? On the other hand, you've clearly launched at a time where there's a very specific issue, and there are going to be things that are sort of good or bad that don't necessarily fit into a Corona bucket. And then there's going to be other things that are blindingly obvious, where a company repurposing its manufacturing to make protective equipment or to make, breweries making hand sanitizer. A good example. They're very clearly Corona focused. Where do you sort of draw the line around that? Or has that not been an issue so far?
No, that's been a small issue. I think people understood straight away, which is actually surprising to me because, like you said, the URL is quite broad, but people understood straight away this was coronavirus related. And so on the majority of submissions that we take in, they have been corona related. And I guess that also speaks to how relevant the news has been to this, because let's be honest, the news has been pretty much 99% corona related. So,
right, you struggle to find other stories. That's
exactly. So unless people have been, keeping in their locker a hatred for a company over the last few years, and they've just got these, articles listed, and they're going, one day there's going to be a website where I can submit these past, then the majority of information.
Desperately hoping someone will do it, and then you have, right?
Exactly. But we have had information. It's only been a small percentage, but we have had information from people where they've gone, well, this company did this and this company did this. And I've read it and I've gone, that's really bad, but that doesn't have anything to do with coronavirus, anything in that relation. Now, the URL is broad because I want this to be bigger than coronavirus. I started it on coronavirus because that's where my anger started, and, reading about all these companies and public figures doing bad. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I could have bought, did they help coronavirus.com. But straight away, I thought, well, if this becomes something, then the website could go into other topics that matter to people, like global warming, like slave labor in developing countries. This could matter to people about what Amazon and what their take on is on global warming. Are they hurting the planet? Are they actually doing anything for the planet? What are the news sources for that? In the same way for coronavirus. So that is the long-term plan for the website. And we're actually working on that currently. It takes a lot of development because the way that the website is currently set up is that everyone gets one profile and then we list all the things for them. So at the moment, it's all coronavirus related. But in the future, we want a landing page for Amazon, for Microsoft, for whoever. And when you type in Amazon, and use the website in the same way, then you'll see a landing page for Amazon. It'll say, well, you can click on this icon for global warming, click on this icon for coronavirus, and it'll take you through to the current profile you see of whether it's good or bad for that. So we kept it broad for that reason. And so the information that we do get on a company, which is non-coronavirus related, we don't delete it. We again put that into another queue, into another pipeline, just like the information we get that has no source. That's a different pipeline as well, because this is all information that we're gathering that we will do something with in the future. And so once this whole period is over, I like to think by the end of the year, we'll have it all set up so that if you were to go back onto the website, let's say November, December, then you'll be searching for the company and you'll cool, okay, so global warming matters to me. Let me see how they rank for that. And then we'll be doing a whole different project on gathering information from that point of view. And that's where I kind of see the website evolving, which is why I've kept it so broad.
So it's interesting. I mean, I was reflecting that you could take this in a direction of sort of like TripAdvisor, except TripAdvisor is I talk about my personal experience. But what you're basically doing here is taking something that could serve a similar purpose, which is before I decide whether to buy something from this company, to invest in it, to go on holiday with them, I can have a look and see where they stack up. And so it would give me a flavor for who am I engaging with and do I want to engage with them? And so it would kind of be fulfilling the same purpose. It would just be it wouldn't just be personal experience.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the moment, everyone's interested in coronavirus. Everyone's affected by it. So it matters. But then after that's over, sure, it could be used as a tool for people to use about how this company treated their staff, with regards to coronavirus. But then after this is all over and the dust settles, our core beliefs and things that we believe in are going to come back to the surface. So once we're back out in public and we're living our lives and going to work and everything, then we'll start going, okay, now how does this company, stack up against global warming? Or, is Apple still using slave labor or child labor in, a developing country? That matters to me. And I want to be the source for that and go, yep, here's a list of all the things that Amazon are doing or Apple are doing or Microsoft are doing. And hopefully that can then be further information to fuel you and inform you better about whether you want to invest in that. So that's where I see the company going forward. And there are a few other things that we're going to do, which we haven't solidified yet. So what I'm mentioning now, we're definitely doing that and we're working on that. And that takes a lot of development because it means that we have to rework from a development point of view how the website works currently so that it can actually factor in different topics for people that they may care about. A few other things that we've got under the hood at the moment that we're working on, I won't mention because we don't know how we're going to achieve it. But if we do, then the site's hopefully going to be a free tool for everyone to use, going forward.
Currently self-funded. So obviously the sponsorship would be a tricky thing for you to navigate, I guess, given the neutrality piece.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the first things that we discussed when the site launched and was straight away popular. Within the first week, we had something like 150,000 people visit the site. I think we had one day we had 60,000 people on the website. It was just unbelievable. And we were thinking, well, how are we going to fund this? Because straight away, as soon as it became popular, I had to upgrade the servers. And so I pay £40 a month to keep the site running because it needs really fast servers to be able to take that kind of traffic on the site. Now that comes out of my own pocket. And look, I'm thankful that I can afford to do that, and I will continue to do that for the foreseeable future. That's not something that I worry too much about. What I worry about is the site actually being sustainable in itself. That's what I care about. If it doesn't become sustainable, doesn't mean it's going to go down. I'm going to keep funding it. I want this site to be there. But one of the first things we thought about was, wow, we're getting a lot of people. Should we put advertising on the website so we can bring money back to ourselves?
Right.
And we thought straight away, as soon as we said it, we thought, no, we're definitely not doing that because firstly, it will make the site look like it's a commercial venture, which it definitely is not. Secondly, the site looks, I think, personally, quite nice and simple and straightforward as it is. If we start introducing other elements where you've got banners down the side and things like that, it will just look terrible. And we didn't want to degrade the website. We want it to look simple, straightforward, professional. And so we thought, well, we're definitely not going into advertising because it's not, and we're not there to make money anyway. So fine. Then we thought, well, we're not going to take sponsorships from anyone because we don't want anyone to ever sponsor us or even invest in us. So I'll never sell off part of the company to a big company because, the website's proven popular and it could be seen as a branding or marketing website as such. And some people might see some kind of aspect to take it and, give themselves goodwill. And we never want someone to have any kind of power over us so that they could go, well, look, we invested, I don't know, £10,000 in your company and we own half of it. So therefore, give us a good profile. We want to be seen as a good company. I don't want that kind of power. So I own the company. It's fully in my name. Website's fully in my name. We won't be taking sponsorship. We won't let anyone invest in us in any way whatsoever. And so the only thing that we're ever going to do is ask for donations. And if it comes, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. Like I said, I'll keep funding this. We do have a Patreon. We do have a Ko-fi or however you pronounce that on the website. And we have seen people invest. I haven't made enough money out of it to even pay for 1 month's hosting yet, which is fine. But more than that, even if people only invested or donated £1, I'm always thankful because it shows that people really care that much. This resonates with them that much to keep this a free resource that they're willing to say, here's £1. To me, that's as much as someone giving £100 or, a couple hundred, because to me, you've gone out of your way to go through that process to give me £1 towards this free thing that I'm doing. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me because, it just shows me that there is, a gap there that I'm filling that people really seem to care about.
Look, in terms of people volunteering to help you, are you open to people contacting you? And I'll put details of all these things in the show notes if people are interested.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, initially, I was against the idea of volunteering because I've always liked to do things, and keep it, in my opinion, and obviously that's a subjective opinion, from being, muddied by other people's opinions or politics or beliefs or anything like that. And I always try and keep things neutral. And I'm always scared that if I bring someone else into it, then it might change what I've created. But my friend straight away convinced me, no, you need volunteers because this is too popular for one person to be running. And he was correct. I was wrong in that. I should have gotten people in straight away. And I waited too long to do that. And so when we did that, we put a banner out on the website to say, look, if you care enough about this and you want to help out, we are looking for volunteers and we'll give you access to the back end of the website, limited rights to be able to go through, view the submissions and get them ready to go to the front end. And as soon as we did that, we had so many applications. We had more than we could ever get through. And I've taken on about up to 10 volunteers who are working on the site at any one time so that we can keep it running and keep it updated. But if I ever needed more people to help out, which, at the moment I don't, but if I did, I've got probably another, I'd say 50 applications who I had to reject and say, sorry, it was a first come, first served basis. You guys got there too late. You got there too late by a day. Within a day, we had more than we needed. So as much as I love people's passion, I've had some great emails from people. People are so passionate. They want to help out so much. They want to be involved. And I've had to say, I'm really sorry. I appreciate your passion for this and I appreciate your support, but we just can't. I don't have the time to onboard everyone. I don't have the time to, review everyone's work. This is too much for even me to do around my full-time job. And some people then even came back after that and said, that's fine. I don't need to be in the back end. Let me promote the website for you. I'll run campaigns on Facebook. I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. And I had to say, do not do that. Please do not spend your own money promoting this website. If you want to get the word out to your network, to your friends and family and colleagues, definitely do that. This is our Twitter. This is our website. This is, but do not spend your own money on this, because we don't want people, donating in that way. We don't want you spending your own money, and we don't even know if it's going to be effective. So it might be a waste, and it might feel like you're doing something, but we don't want you to waste your money or your time in that way.
Wow, that's and as you were talking, take this question the right way, right? But as you were talking about the sort of the control you wanted, for all the right reasons. There was in the back of my mind, I was kind of thinking, well, that's probably an argument Zuckerberg would have come up, which is I've set this thing up and I don't want to cede control to anybody else. And so that's taken his let's give him the benefit of the doubt here, and his well-intentioned thing to connect people and all the sort of noise they make around the positives of social media, but it's allowed him to do some interesting things. Have you thought about that side of it, the sort of the calibration piece, the how do I know that my own sort of auditing of things is appropriate? Who's challenging you? Have you thought about if it gets bigger, regulation, auditing, all those sorts of pieces? And I recognize it's a really open and it's a deliberately challenging question, and there may not be answers, but I'm just interested in how you're thinking about.
I mean, I guess this is a completely subjective thing. I don't think I've got a better moral compass or a better, higher regard of ethics than anybody else. I guess nothing to do with that. I guess I knew why I created the website, and I knew from the beginning that it had to be as neutral as possible, which is always one of the most difficult things about the website. It had to be as apolitical, and it wasn't making a case for or against anybody that hadn't already made in the public domain. It was just there essentially as a library. And I knew that that's what I wanted, but I was always scared that I would introduce people into that fold who had their own, their own agenda, their own politics. That has happened with some people. I'm not going to name names, but I have had that even if it's just to a lesser extent. I don't like it, because the website has to be a library of information on a company. And so I didn't want anything to deter from that. And so that was my biggest fear. But ultimately, that does make me sound, which I fully admit, like a control freak, because I've created something that's not really my own. It's a public idea. Just because I was the one that went ahead and did it and set up the website and started, filling it with information, doesn't mean that I own the concept. Doesn't mean that I'm the best person placed to do that. It just means I was the only one at that time in that moment to have gone and done it. And that's fine. And so I had to concede that I may not be the only one who was right for this, and that there were people out there, millions of people, I would say, because, considering how many people there are in the world, I'm sure there are millions, tens of millions of people who are just as qualified as me to do this. And I learned that straight away. But I still keep control, because I still have that fear at the back of my mind that this thing that I've created, which has been hugely popular, could be swayed in one direction or the other. And I just can't let that happen, because if this was just me doing it as a hobby and I was getting, 100 people a month coming to the website, then I could take control. Nobody would care. And, it would just stay as it is. But this site is getting hundreds of thousands a month. And so I feel like it could really have an impact. If we were to make a case one way or the other, it could really sway people's minds. And I don't want to do that. I want them to look at the information in a neutral way and make up their own minds about how they judge that information.
Question was sort of genuine interest, but also slightly unfair, because you sort of sit there and go, we've just set this thing up, right? And there are a whole load of dynamics and issues that you need to think about. As you've pointed out, I've realized this myself, just setting up a podcast, it costs far more than you think. And there's a heck of a lot more stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And I'm sure the same will be absolutely true for what you're doing in terms of the costs and the efforts involved. And almost the simpler it looks, the harder it is behind the scenes, because you've made an effort to make that happen. But there is something interesting here, right? Which is that you are, in a way, holding other people to an ethical standard. Now, you're not judging on necessarily what that standard would be, but you are saying, look, we're going to hold you to account, and we're going to for good and for bad, and we're going to put that stuff out. And so there's an interesting question that goes, at some point, if this thing continues to grow, you will get to a stage where your influence starts to matter. And then you get this interesting question that one can sort of ask of certain religions, where, you've had people preaching at others, and then let's take the Catholic Church, well-known stories about what went on there, and sort of the less than holy behavior, should we say, to put it simply. And so there's an interesting question at some point, if this goes the way you want it to go, there's going to be an interesting question where a lot of people are going to, and they probably already are, I'm guessing, turn a spotlight and you go, who are you to sit in judgment over us? And I guess your counter argument would be, I'm not sitting in judgment, I'm just reporting. But there is an interesting piece here that sort of is worth thinking about, in that you've unleashed something with all the best intentions, all I think, but you're going to come to a point where that starts to get quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, that would be my answer to it. And that's why I want to keep it as neutral as possible, because essentially, who am I to judge these people? I am no one. Who has the right? I think we all have the right to judge these companies because ultimately we're the customer. Whether we're paying for it or not, we're always a customer in some aspect. We're giving them money. And so it's all within our rights to judge them, because if we're willing to give them, £1,000 or over £1,000 for the new iPhone, then we should be able to go, but why did you use child labor in a developing country to build that? Why are people in your factories dying? Why do they have to work 18 to 20 hours a day on less than minimum wage in their own country? So we're talking a developing country, and then the minimum wage isn't even being met. We have the right to ask them that, and to have it somewhere where we can all collectively gather and go, this is where the information is. I remember they did that, or I forgot they did that, but I'm glad that this website has reminded me. But I'm not there to give an opinion. The news company has already given that opinion. So if this becomes popular, and I'm the let's say the spokesperson for this website and this company, and somebody, questions me on that, I'll say, well, I don't have a right to do it, and I'm not doing it. If anything, I'm not calling out anyone individually or specifically. I'm only listing all the information that's on the internet already and putting it into a place where people can find it. It's like saying, could I go to dailymail.com or The Guardian and just type in Apple and just see all the news articles for Apple? And can someone just put it in a simple way, like a bullet point for each article, to go, okay, well, this article is about this bullet point. That's all we're doing. We're just creating a search functionality for articles already out there. So I'm not trying to, give an opinion on anyone. I'm just saying, here's the information. You make up your minds.
Right, so it's a sort of ethical news aggregator.
Yes, precisely.
Where you can come to one space and spot what's going on. And I guess, we've talked a lot about the sort of submission side of it, but how have companies been reacting to this piece? Because I could sort of imagine them waking up to it, particularly given the climate, and trying to reach out to you to try and, I don't know, suss you out, influence you, whatever. How's that playing?
Yeah, that's been the most shocking thing, because I never expected to build something where not only would the employees of a multi-billion-dollar company come knocking at my door and email through or submit through and say, hey, you got this wrong about my company. They're actually really good. Here are all the sources. One company just in the last 24 hours has spammed me with 25 submissions about their company. And I just woke up and I thought, I've got to go through this, because someone's gone, how dare you say this about my company? Here are all the things. And I mean, in a way, they backed up. From what I could see, I only briefly looked at it, but I could see that they backed up most of the things they were saying. So, okay, great, fair enough. That'll make it onto the website if it's all accurate and true once I've, vetted it. But then some people have come in with just commentary and gone, no, this is incorrect. We're doing this and we're doing that. But they're just like, oh, I don't have a source. I work here. And I'm like, how do I know you work there? How do I not know that you're just there to change the profile on the website? You need to prove it in some way. And again, I'm not a journalist. So if I was a journalist, I might go further and go, okay, well, email me from an official email address so I know that you work there. But also then how do I judge you as a person that's not lying to me? You may be a manager and maybe, may have some certain KPIs to meet. And you've gone, well, I've got to go and change the opinion of people online about my brand. And I'm a manager. So I'm just going to start telling people we're good. Okay, fine. How do I know you're good? Right. I can't take your word for it. But then the other thing that shocked me is to go past the employees that I've submitted in from these big companies, we've had it from loads, a couple times we've had really senior people from these multi-billion-dollar companies actually submit in or email through on the press. So, like we might have like a VP messaging. We even had a CEO and founder of a billion-dollar company personally message me through and say, they didn't even have a profile on the website. They wanted to be on the website. So they said, oh, we're not on the website. Look at this good thing we've done. You should put us on there. And all I thought was, this is unreal. Like, there's no way you're the real person. I had to literally connect with them on LinkedIn and be like, did you send this in? Because surely you've got better things to do than worry about my little website. You're running $1 billion company. Why do you care? And he was like, no, that was me. Yeah, please put that on the website. We'd like a profile on there. And I just thought, wow, that's when I thought this is really spreading out. People are really taking note of this. I'm a bit surprised at how popular it's been, but I can't believe how much people seem to actually, credit it or think of the reputation is there straight away. And I guess that to an extent that's because we've tried to keep it neutral.
But that's fascinating, right? Because I can sort of see, you've put something negative out there. So because of your scoring system, I can I can flip between being good and bad, right? Depending on how many things come in. So if I've done lots of bad things and then I make up for it, I can go from being negative to positive. And equally, the inverse is true. And so there's an interesting thing here. I would have expected the people to get in touch with you with the people that come off badly. But what you've just described is an interesting thing of saying there's a sort of virtue signaling piece that says, we want to be included for positive reasons, which of course is an interesting because then you're into your ethical dilemma piece around, are they doing this for PR or are they doing it for the right reasons? And that kind of, I think, is an interesting question here, which is they clearly see the benefit of being the positive association, which I think everybody intuitively understands. But there's a really interesting piece there that sort of says why, if you were doing this for the right reasons, we shouldn't be finding out because you're spamming us with emails.
Yeah, definitely. I've had this exact conversation many times internally with the volunteers. And the conclusion we came to was, sure, most companies probably are doing this for the PR. Not all of them. Sure, I'm sure there are some altruistic companies and owners and public figures who are doing this because they genuinely care. But a lot of them will be doing this for the PR because they know that they're going to get, branded as a good guy or a bad guy in the news. But ultimately, we don't care if they do it for PR reasons or for altruistic reasons. Ultimately, if they're going to, create a fund that supports their staff, that gives them 2 weeks, 4 weeks, months off, and are willing to pay them their full wage, if they did that for the PR, who cares? The fact is that the people are being looked after. If this is what it takes for people and companies to do the right thing, for to get some kind of good reputation out of it at the end of it, fine. Have your good reputation, have your score 100 out of 100, as long as you're taking care of people, because that's what really ultimately matters. And it's like that thing that people say where, no good deed, I can't remember what the saying is, but it's essentially, no exactly.
Deed goes unpunished.
Or, nobody does anything without something to gain from it. Even us in our day-to-day lives, like I may do something nice for my partner because I love her, but ultimately, I'm gaining something back. I'm getting an emotional connection back from my partner. Right. So I'm being nice to her because I love what I get from her, the warmth and everything. So who's really doing anything in life without some sort of positive result back?
You've started with something very simple, which is just you've taken this, and I love your depiction. You've taken this A2 piece of paper, which is an interesting start point, right? Because that's a recognition. If you start with A2 piece of paper, it's going to be a big task. And we've, if you start with a post-it note, there'll be a different sort of stuff. But you've got this very simple idea, and you're already getting into some quite complicated ideas. And I was thinking as you were talking, so you've got 1,000 things in the queue. So the speed with which the website gets updated, it could be some way down the line. And so there's a question there about how do you handle those things? Presumably first in, first out would be a logical answer to that piece. But there's a question there around the structures around that. There's a question around the rating system. There's a question around how do you cope with people coming back to you directly with stuff how do you equate what's reported in the newspaper with what the company itself is saying? And all these things start to get really interesting. And I think what you've unleashed is probably a whole host of dynamics that are not clear and don't have answers. I think it's really easy to kind of pick holes in bits you're doing, but recognizing that you've just started out with a simple objective, and like all things, you're going through puberty, I guess. And it's just it's a classic tech company thing, prompted by a societal piece that says you're growing super fast. So this stuff is going to happen. And even the best laid plans would go hideously wrong definitely. At some point.
I mean, the way I approach things, because my profession, I'm a project manager in software and digital and stuff. So I work with teams and I create, websites and softwares and digital applications for a living, for big companies. And the way I go through things is just make the thing. Like, yes, I know that there's a better, more stringent way of making things. A way where you could, tick all the boxes, consider every little aspect, but then that thing never or rarely gets made, or it changes by the time you made it. It's an agile way of working. And so the way I always do is just make it, do it. And then if it becomes popular and it's great, then just play catch up. But at least you did it. There was a fear with something like this. I mean, this doesn't apply to everything because of some things, you can take a methodical approach.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue manufacturing drugs or protective equipment, right? You don't want people kind of, let's give this a go, put it out there, see if it works, right? There's some structure around that for a reason, but I think...
No, exactly. So there are some things that need that time and that patience, but then there are some things which are so, relevant and to the time and to the place, like this one, that there is a fear that if you take too long and you're too methodical and you're trying to, appease everyone and you're trying to tick every little thing, that it could just never get made. It will just crumble under its own weight of complexity or whatever. And that's what I feared, is that if we just didn't go ahead and make it, then it would never get made. And there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be, some sort of catalog of the things that people did. And yes, we are playing catch up. We do have, a massive backlog that goes back to the start of this month, in fact. And it is very hard because everyone's still working full time. They're trying to do around part-time people work evenings and early mornings and things like that. And I work on this throughout the day, but there's just too much for us to do. But if we never did it, if we'd never done this, then we would never have that backlog. And that's my fear. That the fact is that we do have a database which has nearly 1,000. We do have a backlog that is over 1,000. But if we'd taken the slow approach, then we may have 5 profiles on the website, 10 profiles, and it wouldn't be much use. And people would have seen it and gone, great idea. We'll come back in a year when you've got something more useful.
Right.
And so I just wanted to make it, fill it up. And then, if we have to play catch up, we have to play catch up.
Fascinating. Final question, because I'm very conscious, having talked about the backlog and how much work you put into it, that I'm taking some of that valuable time, but hopefully this will be useful in other ways to you. What have you learned about human behavior from doing this?
What I've learned, human behavior, or the main thing I like to take away from this, is that I started this out because I was angry at companies and public figures from what I perceived as being bad and doing terrible things, profiteering, at the expense of their employees, not helping them out, furloughing them, firing them, whatever. And so when I created this website, I just thought this is going to be a website about all the bad things that everyone's done. And that's what it's going to be. To my surprise, there are far more good deeds that companies and public figures have done than there are bad things. It may even be that a quarter of the website is bad things and 3/4 of the website is actually good things. And you can see that if you're to go on the website and you're to go and look at the heroes and the zeros pages, you'll see that, the zeros may be like something like 200 profiles and then the heroes are something like 800 profiles, something like that. Like it's literally that kind of scale. And that's the biggest thing that I've realized, is that whilst I was living inside a bubble on Twitter and going, I can't believe that all these companies are terrible and they're doing terrible things and they're mistreating everyone. In making the website, I've realized, oh, wow, actually, the majority of people are good. The majority of people are doing good things. And I'm surprised by this. And I want everyone else to know that it just seems like it's not the picture we paint of this. Yes, Amazon and Apple and Microsoft and all these companies come to the top of our minds when we think about the bad things, but then there's 10 times more companies doing good things out there, giving away their services for free, giving away their equipment for free, refactoring their factories to make, gowns and PPE for, NHS and things like that in their own countries. And that far outweighs the bad things happening.
That is a lovely, uplifting note on which to finish. I will put links to you. The website's pretty obvious, which is didtheyhelp.com, but we'll put links to your Twitter, social media, and all the other pieces that we talked about. But Pooj, thank you. Firstly, thank you for setting this up, because I think it's a really, really interesting story of its time. Secondly, thank you so much for spending the time to talk about it. It's been really interesting, not just to understand about the website, but I think you've raised some really important dynamics in terms of ethics and how we think about things. So thought-provoking in terms of the initiative, but also thought-provoking about the broader societal points that you raised. So thank you so much.
Great. No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I mean, I can't take all the credit for it. We've got all these volunteers who actually, I might just name some of them just because, this is not just me. So you got the web developer, Jack Ratcliffe, and you got Keval Patel, who's an editor, Leah Sharp, Mike Essex, Josh Yard, Bobby Ashley Lake Gale, Sophie Armstrong and Becky Brown, and a bunch of other volunteers who we've recently brought on who, try and do this around their spare time. But the team page is on there. I don't do this all by myself. I wish I could say I did, but I don't. I do a fraction of what these people put in. And thank you very much, Christian, for having me on. I'm always happy to talk about this and discuss, the pros and cons of this, because I fully admit that it's not a perfect project, but it's just something that I felt needed doing.
Brilliant. And look, if it flies in anywhere near the way that you're talking about it, I would love to have you back to have a further conversation. So thank you so much.
Great. I'd love to be back. Thank you.
That's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My thanks to Pooj for appearing and to you for listening. If you're not already a subscriber to the Human Risk Podcast, you'll find it on all of the major platforms. If you had a spare moment to leave a review for the show, that would be hugely appreciated. That allows me to raise the profile of the show, get new listeners, and continue to attract the kind of high quality guests that we've managed to have so far. If you're interested in Pooj's website, didtheyhelp.com, you can go there, and I've put details of their social media accounts in the show notes to allow you to follow what they're doing more closely. The only thing remaining for me to say, apart from thanks for listening again, is stay safe, remember to wash your hands, and look after each other. I'll see you very soon on another episode of the Human Risk Podcast.